This takes us to follow-up question, simply entitled Human Races. I think it's kind of related as well. There's a bit of a background. In the current act of the drama of human beings in continued aspects of dichotomized thought, it seems the surfacing unconscious stuff about humans putting themselves in all kinds of races keeps pointing to a variety of things that seem separate but deep underneath are really pointing to the same thing. For example, the running of who is the best race or who is the lesser race, from IQ to crime statistics to history books, who is gunning for the title of who were the original Egyptians, Israelites, Aryans, etc. It seems the revelations of the apocalypse are serving to create mental barricades. In addition, there seems to be a simultaneous urge present for certain groups of people as to who is more oppressed, who does not get to say they were or are oppressed, and whose oppression is more valuable, and in the larger global cultural efforts to force some late into the table of equality, replacing historical depictions in film and art with people of different races reached labor hearing. All these private in groups wings that feel good and evil soapboxes. It seems that each group of human beings, as cultures, has something to offer each other, something profound and ultimately connected as different colors in the same thread. Is the current dry heaving, so to speak, something that must take place in order for a purification to become possible? Two questions with regard to that. Can you speak to this phenomena? What the collective unconscious seem to be wanting to assert as a means to remain contracted? Or so it seems. Is this continued fracturing of best, worst, first, last, worthy, unworthy, a result of karma? And a second question. Well, let's deal maybe with this because the one is kind of more specific. Well, we can also see this in terms of that what has been spoken of as quickening. Whenever there is any kind of sign of quickening, that in itself also accompanied by accelerated polarization of the opposites. And all that aforementioned by you, various signs of the fragmentation of society can be seen from both perspectives. I will just offer some. On one hand, this fragmentation is a result, a kind of counter movement that is brought about by gradual and rapid globalization. Because I could add to this what you have put quite eloquently together, to the fragmentation of what you have put here as this, who are the oppressed, more oppressed, different kind of segments, different registered, all this is like there's almost a competition out there for who is in the worst or has been in the worst place of all. We can also add to that there is another movement also is towards the preservation of certain uniqueness, of certain characteristics of any given culture, which otherwise severely subjected by globalization. I always like to give examples of countries like Japan, which culture I admire. And it is interesting to see that though it's a very long process for a culture and civilization such as Japanese, which has been insulated from the rest of the world, so to speak, for a very long time, historically speaking, has been kind of brewing in its own juices for hundreds of years until it gave in almost within a decade to complete and utter influence of the so-called, by then, rapidly advancing Western technological advancement associated with the age of industrialism. And we can see how that very culture, which Japan has embraced, often at the expense of very painful cultural lessons, painful, viscerally painful, which it inflicted upon itself. And the Japanese culture is only an example. You can see that happen to many other cultures. I can extend that to other even neighboring cultures. But it is in Japan that we have seen that this embrace of these values, which are almost become like the level of the water which takes its place as it begins to equalize, and that the phenomena of the globalization brought about a greater revival within that culture of everything that has been considered perhaps on its way out. Arts, crafts, traditional forms, that what has been uniquely pertinent to that particular way of life is on the rise, not on the decline. To me, this is fascinating, personally. Again, maybe I'm giving concession, coming to the superficial level of conversation, could all be easier to dismiss it and just give it a blanket of karma. But okay, let's get engaged on this for a moment, a little longer. This revival and the attention to the supreme delicacy and refinement of crafts that Japanese culture is known for, whether this is metallurgy, that tradition of making swords, today are also serving as high quality, where art and craft, line between the art and craft is obliterated as a kitchen knife made by a master. Or whether this is to the cultivation of tea, or a woodwork, ceramic, and the list goes on. How this revival of this, in the face of this blind machinery of globalization, is becoming more prominent. So what I'm saying here, I'm adding to the conversation that what we're witnessing now, this fragmentation that you have pointed out, in terms of, and I would not be surprised if it will not be enough to be a minority in just a blanket, let's say, like in the United States, just being black will not be enough soon. You will have to be really black to be black, because if you are mixed race, then you don't know what it means to be black. You have to be black to be black. Already I have heard that back in the 90s, that anyone who is not, then already cannot and will not be able to understand what it means like to be brought up in this or that ghetto, with disadvantages of this or that, you see? So in line of that conversation, I want to point out that this is a result of that progressive globalization on one hand, and continued fragmentation, because that's what happens in the oscillation process of unification of otherwise, where the energy is on the rise and where the quickening is taking place. So this is a kind of, if you will, an inevitable outcome of that, what this propelling force is now at work. At the ultimate level, we can speak about it in terms of light and darkness will have to face each other in the ultimate hour. This is the leitmotif of all the epics. The ultimate hero will have to be faced with the ultimate villain. You see, it's not just James Bond. James Bond only borrows that from the archetypes of collective consciousness to turn it into the particular form of entertainment. But that very, what you speak of as this phenomena, in my understanding, is an inevitable result of the quickening, on the other hand, of everything that we're now witnessing and experiencing. So in other words, I wouldn't even worry about all that fragmentation, all that kind of schisms and isms, varieties and everything. Yes, again, it's easy to get sold and get taken and carried away by how it can be played and manipulated by any power that tries to utilize, you see, that whatever situation there is. I have that allusion in my response on the question of vaccinations in the video that was published just today by the team. I didn't go into depth, but I could say a word or two, that the very approach to combat pandemic and to redress this virus through a vaccination has been done in such way, again, in my limited perspective from here, that simultaneously plays with a given set of values of our capitalist society, where it has to make a lot of money for those who are in charge of these enterprises. Whether this has some other more sinister motives, I'm not even talking about this. But even the approach, country like Germany, with its infrastructure, with its skills of erecting and building, there is only two cultures in the world that can be set as an example of the quality of building structures. The aforementioned Japan and Germany. They share that trait. Best cars, best buildings. Do you think that if this was due to the shortage of hospitals, what does it take for a country like Germany, with its wealth and infrastructure, to build extra hospitals in view of the potential escalation or during any pandemics? No, but that is not going to bring money in billions if you are not playing with the whole scheme of what vaccines bring in turn. So in other words, vaccines here is not just a result of a logical outcome that there is a pandemic and the best way out of the pandemic is to introduce the vaccines. No, we don't know if that's the best way, but it is certainly and surely the best way in terms of the underlying currents of how the business is done. And that is dictated by the current system we have accepted, or in fractal terms, a reflection of the collective consciousness. That's what capitalism is. We don't have anything better right now. We live at the current state which we currently enjoy as the most destructive economical system have ever existed. Period. Call me Marxist, whatever you want. I just see this from an unbiased, fresh perspective of information available out there which stares me in my face for the past 30 years.